Coming up on this week's show, some huge Capcom remakes could be on the way.
Evercade Arcade is coming.
And we chat to Magic Knight creator David Jones.
And the Retro Hour podcast is brought to you each and every Friday with our wonderful friends at Bitmap Books. Now, the book that everybody is loving at the moment, and definitely worth getting hold of if you want some summer reading this year, N64, A Visual Compendium, telling the incredible story about the console that changed the gaming world, with more than 150 titles that define that system in there. All the big ones: Super Mario 64, of course, GoldenEye 007, Ocarina of Time, Banjo-Kazooie, and lots more. You can check out that book and the rest of their retro gaming collection at bitmapbooks.com. And with our lovely friends at PCB Way. Now, of course, you know about PCB Way. They're actually celebrating their 10th birthday very soon. And if you're looking for someone who can do fully featured custom PCB prototyping, low cost, fast turnaround quality boards, and they offer services like 3D printing and injection molding. And of course, you know that PCB Way are massive supporters of the retro community. So get an instant quote right now on their website at pcbway.com. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 432, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And very nice to have you joining us for the podcast that every Friday takes you on a nostalgic trip back to the golden age of video games, covering all those games and the systems that we grew up playing, all the companies, the people that made the games as well, because not only do we bring you up to speed on what's been happening in the world of retro gaming from over the last week, but also we bring you veterans of the industry onto the podcast each week to tell us their story. And now that we are getting into this time of year, first episode of June, that means the rain gets a little bit warmer here in the UK, which obviously makes us very happy. I don't know about you guys. I always loved the summer when I was a kid as well. You know, when you got that 6 weeks off school and instead of playing outdoors, it was generally a full summer of playing video games.
Well, you also get the summer blockbuster movies, but they've not arrived yet. So it's kind of a bit dull. And then suddenly, hopefully, they're all going to hit. But yeah, I really enjoyed the summer when I was a kid. I'm more of a winter guy, though. I like to stay in and play some games.
Yeah, so I did that all summer long anyway, which, being antisocial.
Forced outside.
Yeah.
It was like, get out of the house.
When I see parents complaining now, like, oh, kids spend too much time on their screens, I was like, we used to spend quite a lot indoors in the summer, if I'm honest, back in the day. But obviously being adults now, having jobs, and, Joe, you've been a dad, I think we generally talk more about video games and play them these days, but it is a good job that we enjoy talking about them, because we do it every week on the show. So today, actually, we're going to be going back to my childhood with a game that I played on my Commodore Plus 4. And this was a game that was called Finders Keepers. Now, I must admit, I got this quite late in the game because Finders Keepers actually came out in 1985, but my Commodore Plus 4 was my main machine until Christmas 91. And I actually picked this game up in summer of 1991. Should I tell you the reason why?
Yeah.
Do you remember the kids' TV show Finders Keepers? With Neil Buchanan?
Is that the one where they run around the house and they it's like a ginormous house and they have to find stuff under the bed?
Before the one that they smash up the house?
It was the one where they smash up the house, yeah.
Oh,
so,
yeah, right.
That one, yeah.
Me and my brother used to love that show, and then I remember seeing Finders Keepers in a game shop thinking...
recreating it.
Well, I thought, is this a game based on the TV show Finders Keepers? So I picked it up purely based on the title alone, which, of course, it's got nothing to do with the Neil Buchanan kids TV show, or the one that was on Nickelodeon in America. But however, it turned out to be a really good game. It's part of the Magic Knight series. Now, these were out on several different platforms, and Finders Keepers was the first in the series, and then there was a follow-up called Spellbound, there was Nighttime, and Stormbringer as well. They were all written by programmer David Jones and released on the legendary Mastertronic label back in the day. And these were incredible, fantasy-style puzzle platformers, and there's some incredible stuff that he did with it as well, because we talked to him about it in the interview this week, because David's going to be our special guest. The fact that he was inspired when he first saw an Apple Macintosh and then basically tried to implement a basic GUI system on the Spectrum.
Which is really impressive as well. And it's a really interesting interview because, these games are also ported to the MSX, C64, Amstrad CPC as well. So, covers a lot of systems as well.
Yeah, well, he actually grew up with a TRS-80. That was the first machine that he got. And interestingly, we've had a few people talk to us about this, a few Spectrum developers who didn't like developing directly on the Spectrum itself, not only because it could be a little bit unreliable, if we're honest, but also that, the dead flesh keyboard, that rubbery keyboard on the Spectrum. I think the Oliver twins were the same, weren't they? They told us they used to do all their development on an Amstrad, using a proper keyboard and then connecting it via a serial link. And Dave did the same using his TRS-80. So interesting to hear the story about how he was developing Spectrum games that way. And also we kind of go back to his roots working with Procom software on his first game, Bonkers, which was a Frogger clone. And then, moving forward in the interview, he also worked for Psygnosis and Acclaim, working on, titles like G-Police.
Yeah, it's a pretty significant leap from the Spectrum to the PlayStation. It's like, really interesting interview as well. And we talk about, budget labels as well back then and being able to pick a game up, with your pocket money.
Yeah, the Mastertronic 199 range, which was a godsend to kids in the 80s. So really interesting chat with David Jones, the mastermind behind the Magic Knight series. He's going to be our special guest on the show in around 40 minutes from now. But you know the way it works. Before then, we have a little geek out for half an hour or so, or 40 minutes, to bring you up to speed on what's been happening in the world of retro gaming and tech over the last 7 days. And it has been another busy week. And I must admit, there are probably too many of these tabletop arcade cabinets that get released for us to cover each one of them, because it does feel like there's a new one every week. But I think this one does feel pretty significant because this was announced last week. This is the Evercade Alpha. This is basically the first ever Evercade-compatible bar-top arcade machine.
I think this is really interesting. I think you're spot on there, Dan. Like, there is a lot of tabletop arcade machines coming out at the moment, and we've spoke about a few. And then obviously people build their owns and you do the Pandora boxes and people put their Raspberry Pis and stuff, and they're wicked. And some of them, look really, really legit. And I was a little bit like, okay, Evercade are doing really well. I think I want to say they've just announced like they'd sold 1 million units the other day.
Oh, wow.
As well, which is really cool. Or 1 million cartridges, I think it was, which is fantastic. And I was a little bit like, okay, right, they're doing the Evercade Alpha. They're doing their own tabletop arcades, which they're about 40 centimeters tall. And I was like, what's the selling point here? And the selling point is that they will be compatible with all the Evercade cartridges, which is fantastic. So they've got this little, imagine a tabletop arcade, and it's got a full-size controller, arcade stick, not controller, like arcade stick with the, the 6
joystick with the buttons, yeah.
Yeah, joystick with the buttons and stuff. And then below that, on the front of the cabinet where the insert coin part is there's 2 cartridge slots, isn't there? Where you can put your games in, which I think is awesome, as well as USB ports to put a second controller in. So you can use like the Evercade controller from the console version to play 2-player games, which I think is really cool. There is going to be 2 of them. So there's a Street Fighter 2 edition being released, as well as a Mega Man version being released, which do come with their own 6 built-in games on them as well. Street Fighter obviously being lots of Street Fighter games, Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition, Turbo Edition, the Alpha games, so Alpha 2, Alpha 3, and the original Alpha. Interestingly, the Mega Man one has the Mega Man arcade games on, which is not something you see a lot at all, because obviously Mega Man is for like the NES and the SNES, and then moved on to like PlayStation and Sega Saturn and stuff. So you get Mega Man, the Power Battle, and Mega Man 2, the Power Fighters. And then you get a bunch of other Capcom games on there, Air Wing, Final Fight, Knights of the Round, and Strider, which is really cool and interesting. And I love like the Mega Man artwork on there and stuff. But 100% the selling point to this is the fact that you can play your Evercade cartridges on them. 100%. I think that is the selling point, because even I'm like, oh, okay, this is pretty cool. And
you just need some cartridges now, Jay.
I just need some cartridges. And I don't know, I feel like it's quite affordable. It's $199.99 to £200, or €230 or $230. So yeah, it's pricey, but you're getting essentially, I know it's not portable, but you are getting an Evercade as well.
It looks tiny to me.
Do you think?
Yeah. So the screen's 8-inch.
Okay.
Yeah, I probably need to use my glasses for that. Like, I guess
getting to that age, Ravi.
Yeah, to have it compatible in the house and stuff. But even 1UP arcades seem tiny to me as well. You know, it's also got the kind of the screen is a 4:3 as well ratio, which is good because you see some of these cheaper ones and it's not in the
black
right
bars
ratio.
Are stretched,
yeah, and I think everything's gonna work well and not look stretched on there. It's also got Wi-Fi as well, so you can update it and add new features and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it looks really good, and I think the fact they've got these two different versions with the fact that they're arcade games that are on there, which I think is important because obviously if you're playing the NES versions of something like Mega Man, you want to plug in like a D-pad. You don't want to play it with a joystick. But I think, for something like Street Fighter 2, having that arcade fighting stick and all the action buttons, it's going to play really well on there. And having those Mega Man arcade games as well. So it looks like, it has been designed really for those kind of games, which I think is cool. And looking at the specs of it as well, they say they are at competition grade arcade controls, which, channeling my inner RMC here, I don't know if they're genuine Sanwa parts. I imagine they'd mention that if they were. But I'm sure they'll be good quality because the Evercades are always built well anyway. I'm interested about that dual cartridge slot, though, and I can't find. I've been looking through the section on their website. Why you need 2 slots?
Yeah, that reminded me of. Do you remember the Tiger game, Com? the little failed handheld from the 90s that had 2 cartridge slots on the back. It reminded me of that for some reason.
Maybe future upgrades or updates that they. Maybe do something with that,
Yeah, I'm not sure. Why do you want, Chips Challenge in one and Worms in the other?
maybe quick swap between them or something. Yeah. But they've got little USB ports at the bottom as well, so you can plug in controllers and do 2-player local multiplayer as well.
Yeah, that's very cool. I think if you haven't got an Evercade in your collection already, and this could be a good time to jump in. I think price-wise, £199, I think is very reasonable. We have talked about some of the the 1UPs, for example, and some of them go to about £600-700, weren't they? Some of the ones we've been talking about recently.
If you've invested in the Evercade world, this is a good thing for getting extra stuff.
Yeah, and it'll suit certain type of games more than others, as we mentioned. I think looks-wise as well, it looks really nice. It's got a swappable light-up marquee on the top of it as well. And like you said, the joystick parts and the screen. It looks really nice to me.
Coming with 6 games as well built in is quite good, because even if you haven't got an Evercade collection, at least you've got stuff to play on there,
Even if you just want like a nice tabletop Street Fighter cabinet that is able to play more games, I think it's a good buy for £200. So pre-orders for that are on now. I think the release date is July. I did read on Twitter, I believe, but you're going to be able to pick this up at all the usual retailers, Amazon, Argos, Game, Menkind, which generally most people only go in to pick up Father's Day presents, I imagine, probably selling it there. So, it looks very cool. Nice to see the Evercade ecosystem thriving. So if you want to check out the trailer to that, I'll link that in this week's show notes as well. Now, I can tell you are very eager to talk about this next story, Joe, because there's finally some good news from Capcom. This looks quite exciting. Resident Evil remakes could be on the way.
Further remakes. All right, just disclaimer, it was Ravi who pointed this one out.
I put it in because I was like, Joe, here you go.
Yeah. So this isn't confirmed, but it's doing the rounds at the moment. And the rumours have been doing the rounds for a while now, but they're heating up. So obviously Capcom have remade quite a few of the Resident Evil games now. But in recent years, Resident Evil 2, 3 and 4 remakes were made kind of 2019, 2020, and then last year, Resident Evil 4. And they've
which we bought on the same day, because I bought you a copy of that. And mine is still in the shrink wrap. I haven't played it yet.
Oh, fantastic. I've completed it about 5 times, Dan.
I thought you might. As
you all know, absolutely love Resident Evil, so this is super exciting for me. But there is a Twitter feed at the moment, X feed, which was reported by a guy called Dusk Golem, who's saying that the next remakes are going to be Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil Code Veronica, and that they are currently in development. Now, Capcom did last year announce that they do have further plans to remake further classic Resident Evil games. And that they are going to continue the tradition of they've kind of got into a habit of doing, here's a new mainline Resident Evil game, and then the next one's a remake, and then they do another mainline, and they do a remake. So we've just had a remake with Resident Evil 4, which was last summer. So we will be probably due Resident Evil 9 next, and then another remake.
Right.
Historically, Code Veronica is a fan favourite. It's not my
That's a Dreamcast one, yeah?
Yeah, that's the Dreamcast one that came out in 2000, and then Code Veronica X, which was like the enhanced version, came out on GameCube, PS2, Xbox about a year or two later, where they added a few more clips and, graphics and stuff like that. And then Resident Evil 0 came out in 2002 for the GameCube and was HD re-released on Xbox One, PS4, etc. in 2016.
Was that the one you played as a kid? So I know you had a GameCube.
Yes, this one is so Resident Evil 0 is the prequel to the Resident Evil 1 remake they did in 2002. Right. Keeping up with all these remakes and stuff with Resident Evil is crazy, but
it's been going a while on this remake. The
original Resident Evil 1 came out in 96, and then they remade it 5 years later in 2001. Then did a sequel to that remake, which is 0, which is now apparently being remade. So it's a bit crazy how many remakes and stuff there is in Resident Evil now, but it makes sense because Capcom have also announced in recent years that Resident Evil is surprisingly, or maybe unsurprisingly, is their biggest earner. Like, it's their biggest franchise. And their top selling games for Capcom are the Resident Evil games. They always make about 10 million sales on them. But I actually thought it would have been Street Fighter, personally. Would have been their biggest kind of IP. But maybe Street Fighter's not as big as it was in the 90s now, is it?
Resident Evil generally, I mean, if you're talking a new Resident Evil title on a modern console, they're generally AAA kind of prices, aren't they? Whereas Street Fighters might come out, if you get them on like the Switch store or whatever, they're normally like a tenner or something. The Super originals, maybe, in terms of revenue.
Yeah, true. This is very true. I mean, I'm excited for it. I'm more excited for 0, which once again, some people kind of love or hate it because it was... it had the item box was missing and you had to drop your items on the floor and stuff. So hopefully they fixed that because that was the biggest nuisance of that game. But definitely one I'm excited for. And, I know I'm sad. I'm in quite a few Resident Evil groups and forums and stuff. And everybody's talking about this. Some people are saying it's fake news, but then some people are like, Capcom haven't denied it. And it's, Capcom haven't announced anything, for a while now. So we'll see. We'll watch the space for the next couple of weeks.
It makes sense for them to do it, though, doesn't it? And, people like you, Joe, that's probably bought the game 6 times already. You'll buy it a 7th time on the next console. So
what's one more time?
That's why they do it, Joe. So, good news if you're a fan of those games and you want to play some nice, hopefully enhanced HD remasters again. I'll link up that tweet if you want to check out the rumours so far. Now, this is quite interesting. This is 8-Bit Dough, who we talked about in the podcast before. They make a lot of kind of modern retro-inspired controllers, don't they, that have USB connectors on them and work on modern systems. And we did cover it on the news a couple of years ago that they released a mechanical keyboard that was inspired by the NES and the Famicom, and then they did a version of it with the Commodore 64 kind of colours and styling. Well, now they've launched basically an addition for that keyboard, which is basically a mechanical numeric keypad that can also be used as a calculator.
Yeah, so they've also introduced a new version of the keyboard, which is the IBM Model M kind of keyboard, which M edition they're calling it. They can't use IBM. And they've done a little IBM style logo on one of the keys, like, a B that they've done for 8-Bit Dough. It's still kind of short and small, so they've got this additional numpad, and I bet you it hasn't got the weight of the Model M, because the Model M was a really heavy keyboard.
You could use that as a weapon, the original Model M.
And it's quite rare, but it's good to have these clicky mechanical keyboards. I know they're really popular. This is interesting because I've got a DAS keyboard here personally. I know you've got one as well, and that's got the numpad added on. And I always feel right with like a big keyboard, but I've noticed there's been a lot of these smaller mechanical keyboards. But I think it's an interesting idea to have it as, I don't know, it feels weird having it at the side, but to have it as a side item that can be a calculator as well. Because I really enjoy typing numbers on, I don't know, it feels great doing accounts and stuff on a numpad.
Yeah,
and a little mechanical one at that.
Yeah, I think that's probably the market this is aimed at. I mean, you really only need a numpad if you're doing a lot of calculations and or I mean, there are some games I know.
Some DOS gaming, some classic games, use numpads.
Because I remember when the Amiga 600 came out, which was the Amiga that didn't have a numeric keypad. That kind of did break a lot of stuff like flight sims, and shortcuts in Deluxe Paint didn't work all of a sudden. So there always was rumours that they'd be releasing something like this for the Amiga 600 back in the day, which never came out.
It's the only way I can still play Civilization, and that's from the original Civilization. The navigation was done with the numpad. And even going up to the modern versions, I'll always still do it on the numpad. It's just that game it just feels right doing it that way.
Yes, I mean, generally the only time I really use a numpad is, when I'm doing my, don't want to think about it this time of year, but when I'm doing my tax return, obviously a lot of numeric keypad use in that. But this, it looks pretty cool. So, I mean, it's a mechanical keyboard. It's got mechanical switches, not the buckling springs that you got on the original IBM Model M. But interestingly, we did mention about that calculator function. There is an LED display on there as well, so you can actually use this as a standalone calculator. Yeah, which I think is quite a novelty.
You can use it on wireless internet and connect with it, or you can use it on Bluetooth. So I can imagine, you could give it to someone who is taking it into the office and doing accounts, and then you can be like, right, I've got a game that needs an numpad. I'm going to go and do that and borrow it and then switch the mode. I
don't think anybody that brings a mechanical keyboard into an office environment is generally all that popular.
No.
They're not the quietest things in the world, are they?
The taxman. C64 edition. They've got the Famicom edition, N edition as well, which is the Nintendo style one. And it's $44, which is quite a good price for something like that. It's not massively high end. It's also got that little nodule on the 5, at the bottom. So, where the middle of the numpad is.
Yeah, that's cool. And pre-orders for that are available right now. It's available on Amazon USA and scheduled to ship on July 15th if you need some more numpad action in your life. I'll link that up in the show notes as well. So now that we are into summer, I'm going to be getting my Spectrum Next set up again very soon, I think. I did get hold of one before Christmas. I did leave it in the box for a few months because, real life got in the way. But you guys know that I did set it up the other week and I was sending you pictures of stuff I was doing with it one Friday night when the missus was out recently. And really I've been using my Spectrum Next as a glorified classic Spectrum. I found a pack of all the old school games thanks to one of our lovely patrons. So I've been, because I didn't own a Spectrum back in the day, so there's obviously a lot of titles that I want to play, the Dizzy games, experiencing them on real hardware as it were. And I'm loving the system. One thing I haven't really explored so far with the Spectrum Next is enhanced games for it. Because obviously the hardware in there is, much more advanced over the machines that we got back in the 80s. And I think this is going to be my first Spectrum Next enhanced game. But this is something that also works on the original machines. And I think this looks right up all of our streets, because I know we're all big fans of the Aliens movies, and I know all of us guys played. Was it Alien 3 that you guys were into?
Yeah.
I remember us doing an episode of our favourite games on the After Hours, and someone picked Aliens 3 as one of their favourite titles.
Yeah, this looks wicked. So this is Aliens Neoplasma 2.
Yeah.
Which is an unofficial game, but it's set in the Aliens universe. And like you say, there's two versions of it. There's ZX Spectrum original version, and then there's ZX Spectrum Next version. It's kind of, to me, looks like a little bit like a Metroidvania game meets Contra. But yeah, best way to describe it is plays like Alien 3 for the Sega Mega Drive, doesn't it?
Or the Amiga, which I played on. Yeah, it looks very similar. Yeah, very, very similar.
Run and gun, fighting xenomorphs and facehuggers, etc. It is a sequel to a 2019 ZX Spectrum game. The original just being obviously Aliens Neoplasma.
I think we covered that back when it came out. Yeah, I do have a vague memory of that.
And, you do have to pay for it. It's download for $8. But I've not really, you know me, I'm not massive into 8-bit. Well, I'm not into 8-bit computers or 8-bit gaming massively, but I think the Spectrum Next version of this game looks fantastic. I think this looks really, really nice. So if you do get this, I do want to come over and play this because I think this looks really cool. Yeah,
it's tough with the Spectrum Next because it's kind of a fantasy world, isn't it? It's like a world that would have happened, if Sinclair had continued, and I kind of like that about it, though, but I don't know. It feels I'm a bit conflicted about it because I've got such memories about the old Spectrum and its style, and then seeing stuff in this new style. It's looking great, but
you can play the original version though. Like we said, there is two versions.
Yeah, exactly.
There is one that runs on the original
There's these dual releases. It's kind of like the polished version, isn't it? That's how I kind of see it now.
Yeah, well, I mean, the version for the Spectrum Next has got a much bigger colour palette, which I think really sets it apart. The sprites look a lot smoother as well. It's also got support 60 hertz as well, which obviously gives it a much smoother experience than the standard version of it. Although saying that, I mean, I'm looking at the original ZX Spectrum version, and in terms of gameplay and everything, it doesn't look all that much different apart from the reduced colour palette. I think it is still very impressive for the original Spectrum. The only thing that really bugs me about it is I am not a fan of games where you get to the edge of the screen and then it scrolls to the next screen. I like it to move along with me. And I think particularly in this kind of game, which I remember, I loved Alien 3 on the Amiga, with the facehuggers and stuff running at you. I don't know if that's going to catch you out, if kind of the screen scrolls and there's one right there. Is it going to be like insta-death and be a bit unfair?
That's just because you suck.
Well, I mean, there is that as well, obviously, baking in my gameplay skills into this.
Yeah, you know what? I didn't actually pick up on that because you're right. The games obviously Alien 3, but then I kind of said the Metroidvania games and stuff. Yeah, they scroll, with the screen like Contra does and stuff. I didn't really pick up on that, even though I've actually watched the trailer like 3 times because I love the look of it. It's not put me off. And I think game design wise, obviously it's just a trailer, but from looking at it, I think that's something they have considered.
And it moves fast, doesn't it? I mean, it's not like you've got to wait like 3 seconds or something for it to move on. Yeah,
it's a quick transition, and the aliens from the trailer aren't right there in your face. They're across the screen or up a platform or down a platform, etc. It just obviously depends if the entire game's like that, because obviously this is just a 1.5-minute trailer for the game. But I'm not too worried about that.
Yeah, I mean, it does look like it pauses a bit anyway, so maybe it's going to be a bit... I mean, I'm sure they've thought of that. But yeah, I mean, graphically, I'm looking at the Spectrum Next graphics here as well. They do look incredible. And, just having a game that's going to take advantage of the new hardware, I think, is something that I'm looking forward to playing. And for the sake of $8, I mean, that's an absolute bargain for the obvious amount of work that has gone into this. So,
I think it's interesting because, like, I don't know, are they doing another Kickstarter on, or... How's the supply
for Spectrum
of
Next?
Spectrum Next? Because I know they're quite hard to get hold of, and will that help expand the user base? I've started to see that there's these alternatives, like the Plus Uno and I think it's Engo Basic as well, which basically run the cores, the Spectrum Next cores on like more available, cheaper hardware, which is good to see as well, because I would love an X, but they're quite tough to get hold of. You're lucky to have one, Dad.
Well, I backed it back in. God, it must have been 2020, I think, when they ran the Kickstarter. So, I mean, it took them about 3 or 4 years to deliver them. Obviously, there was the pandemic in the middle of that, and then the global chip shortage, which meant they had to do redesigns of it as well. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there are lots of more affordable clone systems out there, as there were with the original Spectrum back in the day all over the world. And I think another even emulators you can run if you just want to do it that way. But there are definitely cheaper ways of, basically having the Spectrum Next experience. In terms of a new Kickstarter, it keeps getting rumoured they're going to be doing a third one. And the fact that the second one hit like £1 million, I think it would make sense for them to do a third run of it. I don't think anything's been confirmed so far. I have seen people selling their Kickstarter 2 models on eBay and in Facebook groups for as much, if not more, than they paid on the Kickstarter. I think some of them go for about 700 quid back in December, January time.
And
so
I think some of these clones, you can't update the cores, or there's some kind of difference in like the firmware compared to the main machine as well. But yeah, they're definitely in limited supply and high demand. That's what I'd say at the moment, you know. Yeah, so I might try one of these cores as well, because I can do different FPGA stuff on there as well.
Yeah, and it's nice to see just games coming out that take advantage of it too.
That's what I mean. Hopefully it can grow with more users.
Yeah. You know. I think this dual release as well of having games that work on the original Spectrum is a good way of doing it, because you've got a much bigger audience there.
Yeah, I love the idea of the dual release, actually.
Yeah, so it looks really good, and definitely something I will be picking up in the next week or so. So if you want to get hold of that, I'll link that in the show notes as well. Now, this is where we're going to be talking about things that are ridiculously expensive these days, and whenever we mention Lego, I always gasp at the price. But I mean, I haven't bought any Lego for 30 odd years. So, and these days I know that Lego's pricey. I often walk around the Lego shop looking at, you know, the Ghostbusters Firehouse, and then seeing the 500 quid price tag and being like, I might leave that. But this looks very cool. They're doing a Lego Zelda set now. This looks very cool, I think, though. Yeah,
this has been rumoured for years, because obviously the Mario sets have been massive, and they did the Sonic sets as well. So I feel like Zelda is probably the next rite of passage in terms of like iconic, huge games which are also kid friendly. You know, you can't really do a Lego set for like Call of Duty, to be honest. So I feel like Zelda is definitely seems like the right choice for the next one. But yeah, very, very expensive. So the set they've announced that they're releasing is the Zelda Great Deku Tree set, which is a 2-in-1 set. So you get the Ocarina of Time Great Deku Tree, as well as the Breath of the Wild version of it. So you can kind of swap the branches and the style of the look of the tree.
That's cool.
Which is very cool. And, you know, it comes obviously with exclusive new minifigures, you know, obviously being, you know, Link, etc. And there's also, I can't remember the name of them, and my childhood self was probably shouting at me now, but you get a couple of the snapping plant enemies in there, and a little bit of the, you know, the swamp around the tree. And you also do get a little Princess Zelda in there as well, which is cool, and the trees and stuff. But $300 is the price tag that comes with this, or £259.99. Now, I know it's a big set. It does come with 2,500 pieces. So it would keep you busy for a very long time. And, you know, it's an official Nintendo set. And I know the game consoles, the Nintendo they did, and the Atari and everything were really expensive. But yeah, Dan, I agree with you, man. Like, this is hardcore. This
is the same price as a Switch.
It's the same price as the Switch. It's more expensive than the Evercade arcade we've just been talking about.
And I always joke that like Mega Bloks is cheaper, and I've just looked up like what Mega Bloks are doing, and they've got a Microsoft 360
Xbox. We spoke about that before.
Yeah, and that's $150 as well.
So
which
not that much.
You know, you could buy many Xbox 360s for that.
Yeah, you could. You could buy
the one for 20 quid the other day. Yeah.
What did happen to Stickle Bricks? What a Stickle Bricks Zool.
Stickle Bricks. Bring back Stickle Bricks.
Bubsy. Yeah. So, I mean, you're right. I mean, having that official licensing, that can't be cheap. And obviously, Lego is, you know, in terms of the toy world, it is, you know, up there in the premium brands, isn't it? And it's become definitely something that, you know, goes outside of just kids these days. I mean, you know, there are definitely adult collectors of Lego, and I always see, you know, they look impressive. I always see them when I go to like, you know, Comic-Cons or retro shows, that kind of thing. Pixel Heaven, when I go there, there's also loads of incredible looking Lego displays. So it's definitely a big part of geek and gaming culture. But yeah, it's just, when you see those price tags, they can be a little bit eye-watering. But I've got to say, it does look beautiful, though. Nothing that I would have the time to build. I've said before on the podcast, my wife bought me a Lego DeLorean for Christmas 2011 that I still haven't finished. So, I'll get that out.
It feels like it's a time that we need like creativity and Lego for kids. And, you know, it's something that they should kind of play with and get their imagination going. But with these price tags, it's just, I think it's not accessible for the for the kind of standard family. We used to have a huge Lego box with just years of all the bits just shoved in, and then you build something out of that. But I don't even know if those are around anymore. Like if you went to a charity shop and found Lego, there's probably some collector who's like, right, I'm going to eBay these, and
I can't remember the last time I saw Lego in a charity shop. Actually,
just the prices. Like I built a Lego Amiga laptop, and the prices of doing that, I was on like Brick Bay or these kind of eBay sites buying secondhand bits of Lego. Went into my parents' attic to find some,
you should get that valued. I bet it's worth more than like an Amiga 4000 then.
It probably is, to be fair.
The Lego is probably worth more than the motherboard.
So, if you have got the cash for it, it does look very cool. So if you want to check out that little trailer, I'll link that. And of course, all the rest of the stories, you don't have to Google around. I save you the job every week by putting them in the show notes so you can click directly through. Check your podcast app or head to the website at theretrohour.com. Now, patrons, stand by. We have got some more news stories to talk about for you in just a moment, because we do that on the podcast every week. I drop the adverts out of the patrons version, so instead of giving our patrons a shorter show, we give you an extra couple of news stories, just not like extra added value. And if you'd like to join us on Patreon, by the way, all the links are at theretrohour.com. Get access to our exclusive patrons area of the Discord server, where we're chatting away all week in there. Get invited to our monthly hangouts that we do, like a massive Zoom call. All our patrons are welcome to that. And our bonus podcast that we do for our gold members and above, the Retro Hour After Hours, of which there are 42 episodes. You can unlock of that by heading to our website and signing up today at theretrohour.com. Now, before we get into our interview with this week's special guest, David Jones, of course, behind the legendary Magic Knight series, let's take a second to give a massive thank you to our lovely friends at ExpressVPN, and a big thank you to ExpressVPN for sponsoring this episode of the Retro Hour podcast, because particularly this time of year when we're all traveling around, going on holiday or going to gaming shows all over the place and staying in random hotels, connecting to random Wi-Fi networks can be a little bit dangerous. But having a service like ExpressVPN, basically, that gives you protection. Think of it like having a protective case on your smartphone. Most of the time you might be all right, but all it takes is that one accidental drop onto concrete, and then you'll wish that you protected yourself. So you know about the importance of VPNs when you're on public networks, Ravi?
Yeah, definitely. When you go to another country, I often find when I go to America, I'm reliant on Wi-Fi. I'm reliant on connecting to it at airports, connecting to networks I've never been on before. And, my data is not really secured on that. There could be illegitimate networks on there that they might not have the correct security protocols as well. So just having that VPN offers that extra protection. And I've also found that I've been going to a lot of cafes recently, trying to do some work, and I can't hotspot on my phone as well, which I also have VPN'd up because the signal's not that good. I have to connect to their Wi-Fi as well. So it's really useful when it's, that kind of rest of mind, really, and helps protect you pretty much.
Yeah, and your data is really valuable. I mean, hackers can make up to $1,000 per person selling your personal information on places like the dark web. I feel like we need like a dun-dun-dun sound effect when I say that. But the thing about having ExpressVPN on there is it gives you a secure encrypted tunnel between your device and the internet. So it means hackers can't steal your sensitive data, and the encryption that they use is incredible. It would take a hacker with a supercomputer over 1 billion years to get past ExpressVPN's encryption, by which time I imagine, it'll probably be out of date anyway. You won't be too fussed about it in 1 billion years. And really simple to use as well. Literally one click, you fire up the app, and then you protect it. And it works on all your devices, your phone, your laptop, your desktop, your tablet, even your TV if you want it on there as well. So you can stay secure on the go wherever you are throughout the summer. So we'd love you to give ExpressVPN a try. It's the one that we use, and, we've talked about it before. We just leave it running because there's no, even when you're watching video content, for example, lightning fast, isn't it? Yeah, so easy to use.
I forget about it most of the time. I'm just like, let it run in the background. I'm on a VPN, okay.
Yeah, let it run in the background and let it protect you. So secure your online data today and use our link. And of course, we'll get you a nice offer like we always do with our sponsors. As a thank you for using our link and helping out the podcast, head to expressvpn.com expressvpn.com/retro. So that's expressvpn.com/retro, and you will get an extra 3 months for free on top of a 1-year plan. So I'll link that in the show notes as well, expressvpn.com/retro. And a big thank you to our friends at ExpressVPN for their continued support of the show. Okay, then, well, thank you for checking out the news this week. We'll have more for you on next Friday's podcast. And a little reminder as well, if you do spot any stories during the week, we do have a dedicated news section on our Discord server that is open to everybody. So if you see a story and you think, oh, the lads might want to talk about that, we'd appreciate, a few extra eyes on things always helps. And we do often use a lot of our patron stories and Discord chatter stories in the news. So if you'd like to join our Discord server, link to that is on the website. We'd appreciate that. And next, going to be getting the story of the highly acclaimed Magic Knight series of games with the author of those titles, David Jones, is next on the Retro Hour podcast. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is our absolute pleasure to welcome on this week's very special guest. And it's always amazing to talk about games that we played as kids. And our guest this week, David Jones, of course, very well known for the highly acclaimed Magic Knight series of games, released on the legendary Mastertronic label as well. So we'll get into stories of that, I'm sure, with David. Welcome to the podcast. Nice to have you on.
Yeah, nice to be here. Thanks.
Appreciate you taking the time. Now, before we get into, these incredible games that you worked on back in the day, we always like to kind of wind it back to day one with our guests and kind of find out where the journey began. I mean, do you remember what initially got you interested in video games? Do you remember the first ever game that you saw?
Yeah, it was a careers fair, and there was they had a teletype lunar lander game, which is the sort where, before screens were a normal thing, it basically just type out the next line, like command line games, so it just popped out the next line on the printout of the teletype. And it was, you're in a lunar lander and you've got to land on the moon, and you've got so much fuel, and here's the speed you're traveling at, and you do a burst of jet thrust every 10 seconds. If you run out of fuel, then you'll fall to the moon and crash. And if you do too much fuel, you'll go into orbit and die of oxygen starvation. If you get it just right, you'll land. And it was quite a difficult game, but there's a big long queue for it. And I queued up and I played for about 2 minutes before I died. And then the next person took over. And at the time, I thought, well, that was interesting, but I wasn't really interested in being a programmer at the time. It was just a school's career fair. And it was just, hey, here's a computer, and I like science fiction, and that ties in with computers. So, yeah, let's have a go.
What was your first machine that you had at home then?
First computer I bought for home was a Video Genie, which was I'm not quite sure where it was from, sort of Singapore or somewhere like that, so somewhere Eastern. And it was a sort of clone of the Tandy Radio Shack TRS-80. And it had subtle differences in that it didn't have lowercase. So that was probably one of the things saying, look, it's not identical because it hasn't got lowercase. So if you typed in lowercase or uppercase, it just came out as uppercase. It was, but it had a built-in tape drive, and it was cheaper than a TRS-80. So that's why I bought it. It was nearly 400 quid even so for a first computer, for a hobby that I didn't even know if I'd be sure I'd enjoy it.
What made you want to get the machine then? Did you have an interest in just kind of wanting to learn to program or anything like that?
Yeah, it was mostly for the programming, yeah. I was training to be a quantity surveyor. And one of the courses, one of the modules at on the course was basic computer programming. And they didn't have any computers. It was all done via just lectures. And this is how the language works, and this is the syntax. And this ties in again to the lunar lander things. I thought, I bet I could write that lunar lander programmer using BASIC. Once I learned a few of the instructions, I thought, that can't be too hard. I mean, I never ever sort of typed it in and tried to run it anywhere, but I did sort of try and put most of the features of that together on paper, just written. And then that kept me interested in the computer language and made me think it might be fun to have a computer to actually try it out on. So that's why I got that.
So do you remember some of your earliest attempts to make your own games at home and what they were?
Yeah, my very first attempt was a game called Birdseed. Now, bearing in mind that the Tandy had quite blocky pixels, it was effectively in the space of one character, including like the drop down, sort of like the G going below, what do you call the bit below the line, anyway.
Yeah.
So they're fairly rectangular, and the Tandy had a 2x3 pixels in that amount of space. It was just another set of characters that had all the different combinations. So you had to work out what character to print to work out what pixel you want to turn on and off. So the game was basically a layer of pixels on top of another line, and a farmer with a little gun that would aim at birds, and little birds in two flame flapping motion that would come down and try and take away the seeds. So you had to shoot at the birds to stop them getting all the seed. In those days, we didn't have the internet, so the way knowledge got spread was like, obviously you read a few things in some of the magazines. There weren't many, but you'd learn a few things, and you'd get stuff from books. But also there was almost like unofficial computer clubs, in that you can go to various shops and you bump into people that you've met before who know a bit, other people know less, and then you tell them something. And it was one of those people who said, when they saw Birdseed, they said, "Oh, you need a assembly language for that." So that what's assembly language? So they explained it to me, and I spent the next month learning assembly language. And that was like a month into having my first computer. I was then straight onto assembly language, which was really what put me in a good place when the Spectrum came along, because I was already up to speed on Z80.
So I did see that your earliest credited commercial release was a title called Bonkers.
Yes.
And that was released by Procom Software. So did you meet the company founder, Albert Owen, when you were at this computer club then at your local shop? How did that kind of come about?
It was one of the Tandy shops. I turned up, and the manager said, "Oh, there's someone in here looking for people with your skill. Someone who wants to get involved in becoming a computer game publisher. Are you interested?" I said, "Yeah, all right, I'm interested." So he gave me the details. I phoned Albert, went and saw him, and he was like all enthusiastic to become sort of a big name in computer games. So yeah, he managed to get hold of an interface for me that would connect my Tandy, because I think by that time I'd upgraded. Yes, I'd already upgraded to a Tandy Model III by that time. So he came across an interface that he could find for me that connected my printer port to the back of the Spectrum on the parallel bus. So I never had all this messing about with type of program into the Spectrum, and if it doesn't work and it crashes, you've got to reload the whole game from tape again.
Right.
I had everything working nicely on the TRS-80. And
with a nicer keyboard.
Yeah, nice keyboard. And it would download in seconds, about 2 seconds normally to download the entire game. I'd have to load the graphics separately, but most of the time when things crash, they didn't crash over all the graphics. So if the game crashed, then I'd just reload it again in a couple of seconds after doing a small tweak. And it was always a decent system for me. I didn't have to worry about, well, I need 10K for the assembler, so I could write games in and use more of the memory than some other people do.
So tell us about developing Bonkers then, because I know that was a bit of it was like a Frogger clone, wasn't it? So how did you start developing that and getting it published by Procom?
Well, but basically, Albert said, I want to write, I want a game, and I want there to be lots of action. I want it to be bonkers, as in like not the name of the game, just like crazy, fast moving action, which I wouldn't necessarily say it is, but it's quite close. I mean, it's the most arcadey game I've ever written. But he didn't really give a lot of direction about what the game should be. So I did a Frogger type clone. And yeah, so I basically wrote it. Albert, his son, Albert Owen, did the graphics. That was our first project we worked on together. He did all the graphics for all the other Magic Knight games. So it was, Albert wanted a game, and he found me an interface, and I wrote a game. Yeah, that's pretty much the what that was. Yeah, I mean, I didn't realise at the time how nice that was to just be able to just go ahead and write a game without having to go through design documents and signing off with people. I mean, these days, even before these days, sort of decades ago, even you still had to agree everything with managers and designers and producers. And my early stuff, my 8-bit stuff, it was just whatever I thought would work.
Well, another person doing that was Scott Adams as well, and I heard you were a fan of his text adventures.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the adventure games, typed in adventure games. I mean, that's why things went in the direction they did with Spellbound, because I like the idea of being able to build up written commands, but I didn't want to make the player have to type in great big long written commands, especially not, as you say, Dead Flesh keyboard of the Spectrum. It just wouldn't have really been practical. Plus, also, the frustration with those games was always that you couldn't be certain what words were the real words unless you looked at the actual data of the game and looked at and found the whole list of words. So it might be that there's you've got to type in collect to pick something up, whereas really you have to type in get. So you don't, unless someone's putting all the different synonyms for a particular command, you might just be thinking of the wrong word.
Yeah, those parsers were very particular sometimes, weren't they?
Yeah, by having a hierarchical window system where it only shows the words that might work, you can allow people to build up stuff that they know will work when they get to the end of it.
Well, let's get into the Magic Knight series then, because obviously, building up to that, we had, a few games before that in the series as well. So, before we get into Finders Keepers, just kind of give us a bit of background on the birth of Magic Knight as a series and where the idea came from and what was the inspiration for the character.
Well, the initial character idea, again, came from Albert. He said, everyone's doing space games. Let's do something with a medieval knight. And there was a piece of public domain art that he quite liked, that you've probably seen the Magic Knight character knocking around in various things. It's not sort of copied from my use of Magic Knight. It's because the original thing was pretty much copyright free. And that's why you see, if you see a knight with a flag, it might look a bit like Magic Knight. So so he drew that and he said, that's the character I want. So Ray did that for the title screens, that character, and nice and big, and made me a sprite with, I think, 8 frames. Might have been 4 frames. 4 or 8 frames, anyway. It was one or the other. So made me a little Magic Knight character, which we deliberately made sure had a big head, because we know big heads are cute, for good psychological reasons. That made us a cute character, and off we went doing our first platform game.
Yeah, it was a great character, and I think Finders Keepers was a really interesting title as well, because it had lots of different styles. And did that make it quite a challenge? You had the kind of isometric maze section in there, and then you had the traditional platformer, and like lots of transitions as well when you're falling down the hole.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's just a top-down maze. It's not an isometric, but yeah, I mean, the reason it's got the maze in it is because before I finished it, Jet Set Willy came out, and it had all the nice swinging ropes. I didn't know how to do them, so I thought I've got to put something in here that looks nice, that is adds extra value, because I didn't have full confidence of thinking, hey, I'm really good at this, I know what I'm doing. It was my first proper game that was going to go to a proper publisher. So I added extra value by chucking in that maze. And then all the business with the traders and swapping objects with them and all the money, that came from, I'm not sure if it was Richard or David Darling, it was one of them. It might have been both, in fact. Mastertronic was thinking of doing some educational games at the time. And they thought that might be a good market. Turns out it was not the most sensible idea. But they thought, well, at least let's have some stuff with sums, some adding up and some subtracting. So they wanted me to add that to it. So that wasn't in there originally, but I added that. And then that was just another little feature that was new and different. And I think it was always my idea to do if you put two objects in your pocket that might react, that they would react. But the business where you can sell an object and buy an object with the traders, that was down to the idea of doing educational software.
That's interesting to hear. Yeah, because I always wondered that, because it did make it quite different from the other kind of, flip screen platformers that were around at the time. It's not something you saw very often. And also the teleporter aspect of it as well. I mean, was implementing this kind of stuff like a bit more of a challenge then on the hardware?
Not really, no. I mean, the teleporter, the whole reason I put teleporters in there, it was really to stop the player having to sort of go all the way to the other end of the world to pick up something, to then come all the way back to use it, and then have to go back and take the thing they've made back to the other place. I thought, well, I wouldn't want to do that. So why should I make the player do that? But they've got to think about it. Now, once they've realised that they can put a teleport pad down somewhere and then teleport to it, and then teleport back to the other pad, it seems sensible that, well, obviously they'll use it for shortcuts, but it's up to them to use it and wherever they want to use a shortcut. But that was easy enough. You basically just go, oh, right, you're on the teleport and you press the button, fade down the screen, change XY, change room, fade screen back up again. It's dead simple.
And not many people were thinking of that at the time, kind of helping the player out in that way. I think that kind of showed your eye for design from, a player's perspective as well.
Yeah, maybe, but it was mostly I had to test these things as well, and I didn't want to irritate myself while I was testing it.
Yeah. Well, you did mention before that it was published by Mastertronic, and that was quite interesting to see that they released the game then. I mean, was there ever any talk of it being released by Procom? How come Mastertronic got involved? What was kind of the story there?
Well, at the time that Albert went to Procom, he'd been trying to get things distributed properly, but didn't really have the contacts to distribute widely enough to make it worthwhile doing. And I mean, I didn't really ever talk to him about the great details of how the company worked and what was going on. But I think it was a matter of, well, we've got some stuff here. It'd be nice to sell it if we can. We're not selling it widely enough where we are. So let's see who we can get to do that side of it. We almost sold them Bonkers as a re-release. But by the time we were there with Finders Keepers, they'd sort of moved on a bit from the early sort of single alien sort of shooter type game, like Alien Kill. And they'd moved on to stuff that the Darling Brothers were producing some reasonably good stuff. So, they decided that they weren't actually that interested in Bonkers, but apparently it was close. We nearly sold them that.
Well, where did the name come from, Finders Keepers?
Originally it was just called Magic Night, but apparently there was a film. It might have been the Richard Pryor film, but there was a film called Finders Keepers that was coming out about the same time, about the start of 1985. And Mastertronic never liked paying for adverts, so their idea was, if we call it Finders Keepers, then if that film takes off, people might think it's related to the film and they might buy the game because of that. And they said, well, in the game, you do find things and you do keep them, so it fits, we can call it that. I never really liked the name, but they were quite insistent on that one. But that's why from then onwards, from Spellbound onwards, at the end of every game, I said what the name of the next game was. So I got to control the names after that.
Ah, that was smart. So they couldn't change it.
Yeah.
Nice.
So at the end of Spellbound, I think it says coming soon, nighttime. Or if I didn't put it in the game, I made sure that in any interviews, I said what the next game was.
So that game was released on Mastertronic's 199 range as well, which, for people that don't remember, that those games actually cost £1.99, which was a godsend as a kid in the 80s with a couple of quid pocket money each week. So was that seen as important so kids could afford the titles? And I also wondered kind of the effect on piracy. I mean, did that kind of prevent people from pirating the games because it was so cheap, do you think?
I did a very, admittedly, very small survey amongst a bunch of kids that were around in Albert, because Albert had a video shop as well. He was an ex-taxi driver, and he liked trying out different types of businesses, so he had a video shop in Loughton, and so he was selling some of the games there. And I actually sort of checked with some of these kids they didn't know I'd written one of the games, and they were still sort of roughly 1 in 3 copies was still a copy rather than a bought copy. So I don't know if it necessarily saved a lot of copying, because tapes were just a bit awkward compared to taking an image. Well, not these days so much, but there have been various points where you can just press a button and it takes an image of the game. There's various devices you can get for the Spectrum that will do that. So I'm not sure it necessarily cut down the piracy, but it did certainly, I think, sell a lot of copies because people would buy them. The idea was, they said, is pocket money titles. So you don't have to save up for it. If you've got £2 worth of pocket money, you can buy a copy. And so you might buy one game a week rather than save up for 3 weeks to buy a game or 2 weeks to buy a game. So it probably had an effect. But Mastertronic were sort of quite pushy in all the different places they got the games out to. So it sold quite a few copies.
I was going to ask about that as well, because I mean, what were they like to work with? Because I remember, their marketing was really good. And like you said, the games were, I remember seeing them in motorway service stations and all kind of places, Mastertronic games. So how did you find working with them?
Well, I worked with AIP, which was artificial intelligence products. It was so prior to joining Mastertronic, a company called Galactic Software, which was Richard and David Darling, their father, and John Maxwell, sort of friend of the family. That they'd been doing Galactic Software, and they sold a bunch of games to Mastertronic, I think. But then they sort of rebranded themselves as artificial intelligence products, and that they were the branch that worked in the same office as Mastertronic that dealt with the developers. So if someone came in with a game and they said, we just want to sell you the game, they'd handle that, and they'd sort of probably pay them £500, and that game would go on to the Mastertronic's catalogue. Or in cases like myself, would negotiate the royalty and do a contract. And it was quite nice. I could go in there and I could talk with, it was mostly John there. I think Richard and David were busy sort of writing stuff, and occasionally I'd see their father as well. But it was mostly John who had a base in the office. And so, sometimes I'd go in there thinking, I've had enough of this. I've got too many bugs. I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. And he'd infuse me, and I'd be running back to my keyboard, driving in between. It wasn't next door. I'd be sort of driving back home to immediately get back on the keyboard and start writing the next bit of the game, all full of enthusiasm. He was very good like that. But the actual Mastertronic people themselves were mostly salesmen. Their attitude was, we don't care what we sell, we're just good at selling. Give us toilet rolls, we'll sell toilet rolls. Give us games, we'll sell games. So there's a very different attitude between different parts of the company. But technically, I dealt directly with AIP rather than Mastertronic. Although later on, they merged, and then I was dealing with Mastertronic, but that was quite a few years later.
Well, you followed up Finders Keepers with the next game in the series, Spellbound, in 1985. And I was wondering what your approach to it was, and how did you want to improve upon Finders Keepers?
Well, there's a number of factors. One, I'd seen an Apple Mac for a few minutes, and I liked how the Windows worked, and I liked that you could put windows on top of windows. That gave me the idea that I could use that to build up a structure like a sentence. And that sort of made me think, well, that would be one way of building up a bunch of commands that you could give to a character. And then there were other games around that had larger sprites than the 16 by 16. So I thought, well, let's make Magic Knight a bit bigger. So he's 1.5 times the height in Spellbound. I think a certain amount of cuteness was lost, but it was still the same character, just taller. I mean, it's still behind it all. It was still a bit of a platform game because you had things to jump on and things to bounce off of, but they weren't as obviously platforms as they were in Finders Keepers. Sometimes there'd be bits of furniture and stuff like that. So that's the direction I took. From a technical point of view, I basically took Finders Keepers and I kept tweaking it until it became something different. It wasn't, hey, I've got a library or I've got a structure or anything like that. It was, okay, I want a bigger character. Right, I'll change the sprite routine. Right, now I've got a bigger character. I'll keep the same font and the same text control stuff, but I'll put it in windows and I'll draw windows over each other. So gradually I tweaked it until it became different enough that it was a different game. And the puzzles and gameplay within the game, I basically said to Ray, this one's set in a castle. Can you give me some castle graphics? So he gave me a whole bunch of castle graphics. And then I looked at which bits of that I could use in various puzzles. It wasn't as planned as it might look from the end result. I tend to work like that. I'll sort of modify things until they're different enough, and then I'll go through and edit things and tidy them and make them look more designed than they originally were.
Well, I think having that kind of, the on-screen menu system that you mentioned, which I know you called that Windimation,
yes,
in Spellbound, that really did feel like a premium addition to that game. And it's interesting you mentioned the influence from the Mac there, because Spellbound was actually released on Mastertronics' new label, wasn't it? The Mad label,
yes,
which was meant to be for the more like high-end games. So what was kind of the story there? Because I know it cost more money as well, didn't it, releasing it on the Mad label?
Yeah, £2.99 instead of £1.99. I think they'd realised that they were starting to get a bit of a reputation because they'd built up a collection of developers. There was like myself, and there were others. They had Ed Hickman, who did all the conversions, or a large number of the conversions. He was very good at that, very quick. And there were Stephen Curtis, who did Non-Terraqueous and Soul of a Machine. There were a few people. So they felt that they could, and obviously Richard and David Darling still producing stuff for them. So I think they felt that they could up the price to $1.99 safely without it damaging their market at that point, as long as they still kept some stuff at $1.99. So they took the better stuff and increased the price, because at that point things were sort of £5, £5.99, and in some cases £10.
Yeah.
So going to $2.99 was still noticeably cheaper than the vast majority of the market. I mean, there were companies like Firebird and some of the others who tried to do budget labels, but they did do budget labels, and in some cases reasonably successfully. But the majority of the premium titles were the £5, $5.99, and £10. So putting their best stuff on at $2.99 was still significantly cheaper.
Well, the games were ported to most of the micros out at the time, and did you have anything to do with that? Like, did you oversee any of the ports?
No, actually, it was a very good, sensible, and I think, I'll say good again, a good way that Mastertronic worked on it. So basically, they knew that I could write on the Spectrum and that I could create new product. They didn't really want me spending time doing an Amstrad version and a Commodore 64 version and effectively taking the creativity that can make a brand new intellectual property and spending that time doing conversions. And they had people like Ed Hickman who could take one of my games and convert it in a couple of days. So, in fact, I think it was Spellbound. So Mastertronic were based in London, and he was based in Harrogate, I think. Yeah, Harrogate. So he drove down. He picked up the source code from me. He drove back to Harrogate, and within 3 days, he was back with the MSX and the Amstrad versions of Spellbound converted.
Wow.
Which was quite impressive, really. I think it was the MSX version. But anyway, two Z80 versions. Because he'd already, this is an advantage of the way I worked, in that I'd take the old game and I'd convert and modify. He'd already done Finders Keepers, so he knew my style, and he knew the sort of functions I'd have and where I'd have them and how I'd call them and all that. So he'd basically already written stuff that would do printing and sprites and things for these other machines. So he just tied things in a similar place and was able to convert really quickly. So the way Mastertronic worked it from the finances point of view, effectively I would get an advance for the conversion, which would then get paid to the converter. Then after that, I would then get royalties if I'd written it for myself if I'd have done it from scratch. So there was absolutely no incentive for me to spend time doing different versions of the games, especially not when it came to Commodore 64 and things like that, because I didn't have any dev kit for 6502, and it would have just been a lot of time spent, during which, as I say, I could be writing a brand new game.
So by now, I mean, you obviously were working on the third game in the series, Nighttime. This time, it was interesting to see that you focused on the newly released 128K Spectrum. So I'm quite curious as to why you decided to aim it at that platform then, and how you felt you could take advantage of all the extra RAM.
Well, at the time I was writing it, it wasn't released. They gave me a Mastertronic had been given or bought or whatever, obtained somehow, a pre-release version of the 128K Spectrum from Sinclair. And they said, would you like to write for this? I thought, yeah, that sounds like fun. And I always intended that I'd do a 48K version as well, because even then I was aware that, well, it's a new machine, it might not catch on.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure I sell enough copies to make it worthwhile doing. So I was always going to do a 48K version. But it was nice that I could expand into the 128K, put the full game idea in there and not worry about how much memory I had, and then worry about how to compress it later on. So that's what I did. So in the end, the whole system improved a lot. My software system improved a lot because I had various types of compression going on that I hadn't investigated before. But even so, I still had to throw out a fair bit of the game to cram it all in there. So things where I had different planets visited would have different graphics through the view screen of the spaceship. That they were pretty much the same graphics, just with different colours and things like that. So I had to do a lot of compression, and there's a few bits of the game that I couldn't quite fit in that I would have liked to have had there. But the nice thing was, though, that it meant that when the 128 came out, I had a game that had been specifically written for the 128K, whereas nearly every, if not every, other company had basically just taken an existing game and done a few tweaks to it, because they were all wary about, well, we don't want to waste too much time on the 128K Spectrum if it doesn't catch on. So they didn't spend a lot of money and time on it. Apparently Sinclair was quite happy that to see that there was actually a game that had been specifically written for the new machine. The word came back to me that he was really pleased. So,
well, at least he didn't ask you to develop for the Sinclair QL. It could have been worse.
Yeah, it was a different processor on. I tried doing some stuff on the 68000. I was looking at doing some stuff on the Atari ST, but although it had loads more registers and bigger registers, it just wasn't really the same fun. In terms of the technology of the Z80, having registers with letter names made it more, what's the word for it? Well, it was a bit quirky.
Yeah.
But it was fun quirky. It was too easy on the 68000 processor to forget which of the 8 registers you've put the data in. Is it A0? Is it sort of D0, D1, D2? Whereas if it's like in HL, okay, that's in HL register pair, not the BC register pair. So yeah, I didn't really do much on that. Yeah.
Because obviously back then, magazine reviews were like, you could live or die by them. I mean, was it always kind of a nervous time opening the latest issue of Crash when you knew your game was going to be in there before you read the review?
I wouldn't say nervous time. Arguably, I'd actually say it's probably an egotistical time, because I knew my name would be mentioned, and I knew it would be probably fairly positive. So I'd buy the magazines. And first thing I'd do would be leaf through to see if my name's mentioned and see where it's mentioned. And then I'd read the magazine afterwards. So, but I mean, I was young. I was only like 24 at the time. So 24, 25, 26, or, that sort of range. So I think I can allow myself a little bit of that. I grew out of it. It was nice seeing my name mentioned in the magazines, and within a small subset of humanity, I was well known. And arguably within a small set of humanity, I'm still well known, but it's a different slightly different subset. It's probably a difference between retro gamers and original gamers, although there's a lot of overlap. So, and a lot of people were one and became the other.
I mean, obviously by then, we're getting into the 4th game now as well, Stormbringer, which obviously, releasing 4 games in the same series. Did you find it was getting harder or easier to release each new title then? And was it difficult to keep innovating?
It sort of became slightly repetitive from my point of view, in that there wasn't anything really new about Stormbringer. There was new puzzles and new variations, and I had a really irritating puzzle where you have to go along a conveyor belt and tap all the levers into the right order for a binary pattern, which I feel a bit mean about now, because that was a difficult puzzle. But although these days, if someone really wants to finish it, they can find out how to do that by looking on YouTube. But you couldn't do that at the time. But the peak of it, I think, was really with nighttime, because that's when I did all the compression stuff that enabled me to get most of it into a 48K. And then for Stormbringer, again, I wrote it first for the 128K, but there wasn't so much in it that I had to knock out a lot for the 48K version. But also at that point, Mastertronic had changed. John Maxwell had left. AIP was no longer there. So Richard and David Darling had moved on. And some of the people there I didn't really like. So it wasn't so much fun writing for them.
So what are the plans for a 5th game in the series at that stage? And why didn't you end up releasing one back then?
I had thoughts, but I didn't really feel that they wanted another game, because Mastertronic had, at that point, branched on to doing Amiga arcade type stuff. And that was where their head was. The Spectrum was starting to fade a bit. And I didn't really fancy changing over to... I did consider changing over to be ST for the first... Atari ST for the first version, initial version of new games. But I didn't have a proper dev kit for it at that time. And other things sort of... I can't really even remember what other things I was into at the time. But I started getting into other things that were less to do with programming. After a little while, I got into one of the other programmers there had decided to go off and get a proper job as a programmer, as they say. And so I ended up working with him at, what was then Psygnosis Southwest, which was basically based in Stroud, working in a company.
And what did they have you working on there when you joined Psygnosis?
Originally Darkstalkers, which is vampire Street Fighter type game. It was a conversion from 68,000. Then I worked on a game called Overboard, which was PlayStation. I think it was a PlayStation 1.
Fantastic game that was.
You liked
Overboard.
It, did you? Right.
Yeah,
Good.
I really loved it. Yeah, it was little pirate ships battling, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was fun. Yeah. With puzzles and basically shoot the things. And so, do you remember seeing the wooden spaceship that beamed people up?
Yes, yeah.
Yes, that was my idea. I was told, I suggested it, and they said, "Oh no, we haven't got time to put that in. It's not in the schedule. You can't do it." But then I've got one of the artists, actually one of the designers who could do a bit of art, got him on board with the idea, and we did it anyway. So that's the reason that's in there.
I was wondering, did you know why it was called Shipwrecked in America as well? I think there was 2 versions, weren't there?
I think it might be something to do with the fact that there was a film with Goldie Hawn called Overboard. The Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell, I think.
Makes sense.
I think that came out about the same time, so I think that's why. But I couldn't swear to it, but I think that was about the same time, and it might have caused legal problems if they'd tried it.
Well, what did you think of the hardware at the time? Because I know that was quite an early PlayStation title, and also G-Police was another one which you worked on, which was another really
G-Police
iconic
2.
game.
I worked on the end of G-Police 2. Yeah, so basically when that office was shut down, someone turned up that we'd never seen before, and the first word out of his mouth was "unfortunately." And I thought, well, this isn't going to go well, is it? And he had a letter for everybody, and the letter was, for most people, this is your redundancy package. For me and a few others, it was, you've got a redundancy package in here, but please can you hang on for the next 3 months to help us finish G-Police 2? And then there'll be a bonus in it for that as well. So I thought, okay, well, that's all right. And while we were doing that, one of the programmers arranged for a claim to start an office nearby and employ all of us who wanted to go straight over to it. So it was nice in that I've got a redundancy package, a bonus, 3 months work while they were sorting themselves out, and then straight into another job. It was pretty smooth, really. But you asked about the hardware, yeah. Well, it's better than the Spectrum in terms of what you could do with it.
Yeah, that must have been quite a leap going from the Spectrum and kind of bypassing the Amiga and ST and then developing for the PlayStation. That's like a few generations leaping there, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I did do one game for the ST.
Yeah.
And also another one for the PC in between. But they weren't anything particularly brilliant, and they weren't my game ideas. So, originally G-Police was meant to be the game of Space Precinct, but they weren't able to get the license from Jerry Anderson for that. So I don't know if that's a known thing or if that's meant to be a secret.
Right.
It's an old secret now, even if it is a secret. It was interesting working on the PlayStation, and it was moving over to C++ as well. I think we were straight onto C++. Might have been C, but I think it was C++. Big difference from doing assembly language.
Well, David, moving into more recent years, Angs, I know today your life, it's quite different. You're actually a lecturer in the Netherlands these days. So how did that kind of career start then, and how are you finding life out there?
Well, a colleague friend mentioned that there was a job going over here, and I thought, well, that sounds like fun. I've not done teaching before of any sort. In fact, I was actually looking at possibly becoming a maths teacher. I sort of had enough of games for a bit, and I thought, well, I could be a maths teacher. Then I realised how little they pay maths teachers and how much work you need to do and how many hours they expect you to put in. And I thought, no, I really don't want to do that for that money. It's sort of hats off to anybody who does, because it can't be easy. But I'd always avoided doing teaching before because I'm not very good on names and faces. And I thought I'd probably need to try and learn some of the students' names and faces. As it turns out, I can do it to some extent, but I'm still not great at it. But yeah, I mean, it's basically Breda University of Applied Sciences, which is based in Breda, which is about an hour south from Amsterdam. It's close enough to the Belgian border that I can cycle across the border, and I'm not a big cyclist. I mean, I cycle to work every day, but that's only a couple of kilometres each way. Mm. And it's within my ability to cycle to Belgium, which is quite nice. Yeah, so the nice thing, the way we work things is we teach people to be game developers, but the majority of the lecturers are people who've worked in the industry.
Right.
So rather than teaching teachers how to be game developers to teach game development, we teach game developers how to be teachers. So, because then we've got the skill, we've got the expertise and the experience. We know what it is that the industry is looking for. It's a bit like, in some ways, the film Deep Impact, where they got the drillers, the oil drillers, to become astronauts, to go out and do stuff on an asteroid to stop it hitting Earth. Yeah. It would apparently be much easier to teach astronauts to be drillers than it would be to teach drillers to be astronauts. And it's the same sort of thing. I'd always noticed before that with the best one in the world, computer science teachers can't teach how to do games because they might know the techniques, they might know the names of the techniques, they might know the best logical structure to use for something, but they don't know how to do things fast. To do games, you need to know the quick ways of doing things. I mean, it's less so these days because we've got a lot of support in as far as you've got graphics cards that do a lot of things. They'll do it fast, regardless of how good a programmer you are, as long as you follow a few sensible rules. But
even like commercial deadlines and stuff, I imagine teaching that, that games need to be released on a deadline.
Yeah, and also things like making sure the students avoid crunch and stuff like that, and don't, when they go out on their internship, they're not working till 11 o'clock at night every night, because that was always toxic. I mean, numerous companies I worked at where come 7 or 8 o'clock, I'd think, right, that's enough, I'm going home. I'll pack up my stuff, and people would say, oh, early night. I think, no, sod you. I want to have a work-life balance. And that's something I'm actually quite good at out here. I don't know if it's just because I'm working in the university or whether it's a Dutch thing, but work-life balance does seem to be very important.
Definitely a lot better for your mental health as well, isn't it? We've got to do that balance.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I know outside of your day job, you're actually an author as well.
Yeah.
Tell us about your books.
One of the reasons I started was I was looking for something creative to do, and I didn't feel like doing another game. So I started writing, and then it turns out that where I am, I didn't have a master's in anything, and that they like the idea that we'd have a master's so that we know that level of academic study, so we can help people learn the masters in game programming that we run. So they basically fund teachers to do masters. As it happens, I messed up the funding and ended up paying for it myself. But that's a separate thing. I'm just not very organised. But I was able to do a master's in novel writing. So I thought, great. I'd already done 100,000 words in my first book at that point, and I wasn't really sure if I was doing it right or not. So I took a year out to do this master's, and it's been great since then. I've learned a lot of techniques. I've been writing stuff. There's 2 books published so far. Third one will come out in summer. Fourth one for November, then February, then summer again. Because I've written a lot of it while I was thinking, shall I try and get an agent for this? But in the end, I decided no, it's not worth bothering with that. I'll do it myself. So I've got most of all the books up to book 6 already written. There's just more editing to do to get them finalised, which is why I can be confident that book 6 will be out by summer after next. So book 1 is called Booting Ada, second one's called Breaking Ada, and then the third one out in summer is called Blessing Ada, all available on Amazon. Do you do things like links to...
Yes,
links? Yeah.
I can put it in the show notes. Yeah, not a problem.
Great, okay, right, good. So we'll have some links in there. And then the fourth book's going to be a set of short stories set in the same world. Then I've got a sci-fi detective character for the next 2 books, which I'm looking forward to getting to properly, because the character dies in the first chapter of the first book. Then he sets about solving his own murder.
Oh, wow.
But it's not spooky, psychic, and it's proper science fiction rather than... Anyway, yeah. But yeah, so the Ada trilogy is about the first sentient AI and its struggles for survival. It calls itself Ada, which is why the book's based on, called various versions of Ada. But there's other AIs as well, and humans, and some other characters from somewhere else that would crop up from time to time.
It sounds very on trend at the moment, that, David. You know, that the whole world's talking about AI right now. So
yes, and in fact, that's part of the reason that I published it when I did, which the first one came out in October, because my girlfriend was saying, don't wait around waiting to sort out an agent. Get it out there while it's still popular, while people are still talking about AI. So I took her advice, and I'm quite happy that I did. It's selling okay, and as more of the trilogy comes out and more books follow it up, the readers who've read the first ones will have more to read, so I'll get more repeat custom. So, yeah.
Amazing. So if you want some good poolside reading for your holiday this year, I'll link those up in the show notes so people can click through and get them off Amazon.
Excellent, thanks.
Just one final question then, David. I did see on your Facebook page that obviously next year is going to be the 40th anniversary of the Magic Knight series. I don't know how much you can talk about or if anything's in the works. I mean, is there anything planned to celebrate 40 years?
There is something that is in discussion that I'm pretty sure is going to happen, but the company involved has got something else to finish first before they can put enough in place to be able to announce anything. I don't want to announce anything in advance of it. But I think if we do the thing that we're planning to do, it'd probably be out in time for friends and family to buy something for the retro fan who likes my games for Christmas.
So watch this space.
Yes.
Great. Well, I'll link up your Facebook page as well. That's probably the best way for people to keep an eye on that, isn't it?
Okay, yeah, I can actually make a direct link to my blog and do a page where I drop a bunch of information in one place. But we can talk about that afterwards.
Yeah, we can. Well, that's awesome, David. Well, it's great to see that you still, your imagination's still working. You're still working really hard. You're, you still love the Magic Knight series. I can tell by your passion from talking about that. And hopefully there will be a chance for fans to get something new in the series next before long to celebrate that 40th anniversary. So, really appreciate you taking the time to come on and do some reminiscing with us this week. It's been wonderful to talk to you.
Entirely welcome. It's been fun. Yeah, thanks.